Hey everybody, Mr. Bennett. We are starting a new section today. We're going to start looking at what I'm going to call cell activity. And this is going to include a lot of different things. You're going to see details on that later. But cell activity, so we're going to be talking about osmosis, diffusion, plasma membranes, that kind of stuff. And today we're going to start off with eukaryote versus prokaryotes, right? So there's two major classes of cells. We're going to look at these in detail. So like I said a second ago, there's two classes of cells. We've got prokaryotes, which are bacteria for the most part. There are some differences between the archaea bacteria and eubacteria, that kind of thing, but we're not going to get that specific today. So prokaryotes, they are bacteria. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, is everything else. So you can see we've got protists, fungi, plants, animals. But the main difference between them, and this is a distinction we haven't made before. We've talked about the nucleus in particular. But the distinction is that there are no membrane-bound organelles, and that's the key. No membrane-bound organelles, no internal organelles that are bound up by some kind of membrane. That would be a prokaryote, and the nucleus is kind of the indicator that we look at. So you can still use that, but recognize it as a general thing. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, these guys have membrane-bound organelles, including a nucleus, right? So eu means to have carry, or the karyote is the seed, right? So they have a nucleus, but they also have these other membrane-bound organelles. These are much more complex. And eukaryotes can be single-celled organisms like the protists, so this would be like a planaria or an amoeba or something along those lines, or it can be a multi-celled organism like the fungi, the plants, and the animals, so much more complex organisms. So that's your big distinction right there, but there are some similarities between the two. All cells have four common characteristics. They have some kind of exterior plasma membrane, right? And these plasma membranes, we're going to look at the structure of this in a later vid, so we're not going to talk about that today, and I can't believe I just said vid. But we're going to look at those in a later video. They also have cytoplasm, where you also see it called cytosol, and this is the jelly-like fluid inside of a cell. They all have genetic material. Typically, it's DNA. Some cases, bacterial cells can have RNAs or genetic material, but for the most part, we're looking at DNA. And then they all have ribosomes. Remember, ribosome is not an organelle. This is rRNA. It's an RNA complex, right? And that's easy to forget. So a ribosome is not an organelle, so it does not fall into that category of the membrane-bound organelles. It's a ribosomal subunit, right? Two ribosomal subunits that translate the mRNA strand. But all organisms have RNA because all organisms have to produce protein of some kind. So I've already given you these pictures. These are from Wikimedia Commons, so they're public domain. You can go find them yourself. But this is a typical prokaryotic cell. So this is a prokaryote. And I know it's a prokaryote because internally there are no membrane-bound organelles. Some of these larger guys, right, these are the ribosomes. Okay, so this right there, that right there, and I can actually zoom in a little bit. That might help. Oops, we'll undo that. We'll zoom in. Right, so we've got some ribosomes floating around in there. This green one, this might be some kind of a food or of a nutrient of some kind, something it ingested, right? But essentially, if you look at the inside, this thing is really, really simple. Bacteria all have some kind of exterior membrane, so it's that plasma membrane that's listed right here. Some bacteria have what's called a capsule or a cell wall, and we're going to talk about these in a different day. But bacteria are different. Different species of bacteria have different outer coverings, but essentially these help the bacteria survive inside of the cell or inside of a host. Remember, bacteria can be pathogenic. They need some kind of protection from that host's defense mechanisms, and that's what the capsule in the cell will help them do. But pretty much, they have nuclear material, right? This is DNA, and this is circular. It's a small genetic structure, and that's in chapter 12 of the OpenStax book, if you want to go back and look at that again. But pretty basic, right? It's an envelope. It's got some plasma. It's got a plasma membrane, and it's got some cytoplasm, and then this nucleoid thing. It's like not a nucleus because it's not enclosed, but it's got genetic material that's kind of in one spot. They can also have structures like flagella for locomotion, or some pili on the outside for just knowing what's going on around them. But pretty much bacteria fall into this category. Prokaryotes look generally like this guy. When we get into eukaryotic cells, this is where we get much more complex. We're going to start with an animal cell. So this would be a typical animal eukaryotic cell. So our cells look relatively like this. Now, we don't have flagella on our cells, right? But a free-form, individual, single-celled eukaryotic cell could have a flagellum for locomotion. You can also see eukaryotic cells with cilia on the outside to help with locomotion or other things that need to happen. But you can see this thing is full of membrane-bound organelles. Number one being the nucleus, right? All the genetic material is kept inside of the nucleus. The exterior plasma membrane, that is common across all cells, but then we've got the Golgi body, the endoplasmic reticulum. There are mitochondria for energy. There's a vesicle that's used for something, right? Either in nutrient storage, or it could be a lysosome used for apoptosis when the cell needs to die, right? So there's all kinds of internal structures that help this cell carry out its functions. Roughly the same, right? We've got the plant cell. So this is also eukaryotic, and I know because there are internal membranes, internal binding membranes. The nucleus, again, here's the main one that we look for. Genetic material is kept inside. But same thing, it's got some vesicles to carry stuff around. Plant cells in general have a couple of specific structures. They have a chloroplast, right? And this is where photosynthesis happens. That captures light energy and uses it to synthesize glucose, right? Sugar molecules. Another one that's unique to plant cells is this large central vacuole. So it's got a really large sac that can be used for water storage, and that's really important in terms of plant cell health. Notice plant cells also have mitochondria, just like an animal cell, right? In the animal cell, the mitochondria, I'll get my pen back, is that guy right there. The mitochondria is used for respiration. Plant cells do respire. They produce their sugars and then they respire. They break down those sugars for energy. Animal cells, they don't produce their sugars, so there's no chloroplast, but they still have a mitochondria to respire. We're going to talk about respiration and photosynthesis in this chapter as well. So make sure you orient yourselves to the types of cells. Make sure you recognize the differences and similarities between prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Some of the vocab here can get a little bit messy. We're going to look at some of the organelles in specific, but you need to, again, this is like 9th grade level biology, so you should be looking specifically at the new stuff, right? What are the common characteristics among all of these cells and what makes them unique? And then, again, be able to identify major structures. Thanks for watching. Leave a comment below if you have a question.